What is up, everybody? This is JP representing jpfitnesspro.com. I am currently training at a self-made training facility in San Marcos, California. I offer one-on-one training, small group training, online training, or nutrition / meal plans. If you just want the nutrition meal plans by themselves, I offer those in packages or single meal plans. If you guys get online training, small group training, or one-on-one training that comes with your own training app and a meal plan comes with any training package that you guys purchase. Again, you can contact me easily at jpfitnesspro.com or through any of my social medias. Just message me. I'm currently for any in-person training, the first 5 clients are half off. Already, 2 people already took advantage of that deal. So if you want to take advantage of that deal, please reach out to me as soon as possible. Today's episode of the Exercise Science Podcast is going to be about a video that I previously did that I feel as if needs to be talked about a little bit more. And that's on just hypertrophy in regards to time under tension, and then eccentric loading. And the previous video that I did on this was a couple of videos ago, but it covered the fact that people they basically overload the eccentric kind of wrong. And I guess to kind of sum up that video real quickly and then get onto a little bit more in detail stuff, is that people when they do contractions, okay, so you have the positive portion of the repetition, which is you have to accelerate the weight at some point, and then it goes to either consistent speed or it keeps accelerating. It's the positive portion of a movement. So that would be like the up portion on a bicep curl. That would be like the up portion on a squat, the up portion on a deadlift, or the up portion on a pull-up. Now, then you have basically an isometric contraction where the resistance is not moving. You're just holding it still. So if you were to go up to a pull-up bar and you try to see how long you could hold yourself above the pull-up bar and just stay up, that would be an isometric contraction. If you stopped at the middle of the repetition of a bicep, that would be like that would be an isometric contraction. So those are just some examples. Then you have the eccentric portion of the movement or of the exercise, and that would be typically the lowering portion or the negative portion of the movement. So the downward portion of a squat, the downward portion of a pull-up, or the downward portion of a curl. So with these 3 different parts of the movement, the concentric portion, the positive portion, is where you are weakest. Again, you can do this little test yourself if you want. There's a lot of easy ways to test this, but if you're I would have a good spotter for this. But if you were to go on a bench press and you were to, let's just say your 1 rep max is 200 pounds, just for the sake of easy numbers. Whether you can do more or less than that, it doesn't really matter. But for the sake of easy numbers, let's just say your bench press is 200 pounds. And you put 200 pounds on the bar, and that's your 1 rep max. You can lift that through the concentric portion 1 single time, assuming that's your 1 rep max. Now, if we were to put 210 on the bar, you're not going to be able to lift that on the concentric portion. But if you did a good warm-up and you had a good spotter and you unracked 210 pounds and you were to slowly lower it to your chest, you could control it to your chest on the way down, but you couldn't control it back up to rack it on the way up. Now, if we make this a little bit more clear, even if you can't, let's just use another example. Let's just say we took 205. 205 is still greater than your 1 rep max. You're not going to be able to lift it on your concentric portion, but I bet you're probably going to be able to lower it, and then at some point during the lowering, if someone said try to hold it still for a little bit, don't let it lower, but you don't have to push it up. I bet you're going to be able to hold it still a little bit, but you're still not going to be able to push it up. But there's gonna be some type of weight, a number of a weight where one weight you're gonna be able to push up. Again, 200 pounds was your 1 rep max, so that's the max you could push up. There's going to be an isometric max that you're going to have, a maximum amount of weight that you're going to be able to just hold still on the bench press, which is going to be greater than your concentric 1 rep max. And then you're going to have a weight that's going to even be greater than your isometric max. It's going to be like your eccentric load max, a weight that you can no longer control on the eccentric, that it's so heavy that you can't slow it down to any good degree and it just falls on your chest. Now, don't do that. But if you want to test it out slightly, you need to have an intelligent spotter and you need to know what you're doing. If you don't feel like you're comfortable and you don't get exactly what I'm saying, then I would not recommend trying that. But that's just explaining the 3 portions of like a repetition and how those apply. Now, the weakest link here is the concentric portion of the movement. So it's the positive portion where you have to accelerate the weight at some point. Again, that would be like the up portion of a squat, the up portion on a curl, or the up portion on a pull-up or a bench press. So knowing that's the weakest link, if you're working with the weight that you can actually move on the concentric portion, you're not overloading. When it comes to just tension, you're not overloading the eccentric portion or the isometric portion of the lifts to any degree. Yes, you can overload it. You can overload it by maybe going slower. That would be, I guess, overloading it with time under tension, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But not talking about time under tension, just talking about like magnitude of tension. You're not overloading the eccentric if you're able to move it on the concentric. You can't, because the concentric's the weakest link of the 3. So if the weakest part can move it, that'd be like, let's just say you have 3 people. You have person A, person B, person C. Let's just say person A is the weakest and person B is the next strongest and person C is the strongest of them all. If you had a rock that person A could pick up, that would be like telling person C to pick up the rock and just pick it up real slow and say, wow, that's overloading. And let's just say we're talking about magnitude of tension for it being heavy. You're not overloading person C because person C is the strongest. If person A can lift it, it's going to be easier for person C. So that's kind of like person A is kind of like the concentric portion of the lift. Now, telling person C, which would be the eccentric portion, to just lift the rock slower, or yeah, I guess that would be overloading it in a different sort of way. But again, our ultimate goal here is hypertrophy. So again, if our ultimate goal is hypertrophy, if your goal is hypertrophy, if you're trying to overload the eccentric portion of the lift, you're going to have to do it in a way where you're lifting, like supra-maximal loads for your concentric and isometric lifts. So it has to be in the same bench press example I used earlier. If your bench press max is 200 pounds, now I would only do this for advanced athletes. If your max bench press is 200 pounds, what I would recommend is have a spotter on each side and do a very good warm-up, do a good mobility, upper body mobility warm-up, do warm-up sets, a lot of good warm-up sets. Make sure you're primed and ready. Make sure you're an advanced athlete, someone who's used to doing bench press, you've been working out for years. I would not recommend a beginner do this. Is if your bench press max is 200 pounds, let's just say, for example, maybe put like 220 on the bar, 210 to 225, somewhere around there. Have them unrack it for you, and then you slowly lower it to your chest. Okay, somewhere around there. It's going to be pretty heavy, trust me. But then have them spot you and assist you a good amount so that you can press it back up yourself. So combined with their assistance and you pressing, you're assisting yourself, and then you slowly lower it to your chest again. So again, this is overloading the eccentric portion of the lift in regards to magnitude of tension. Now, some exercises can be kind of weird with this, and I don't recommend doing them. Again, if you get creative and you're an advanced athlete and you do it in a very safe way, maybe you have an idea. And I have ideas to do this with these lifts too, but they're just awkward. And some of them is, like, for example, squats. What would you do? I guess you can unrack a weight that's past your 1 rep max, slowly lower it till it hits maybe some like safety bars. Maybe you have safety bars set up like on a power rack, and then have some people help you lift it back up. You can either take off plates, put it back on the rack, then put those plates back on and do that again. But again, that just seems kind of unsafe. I wouldn't recommend that. Again, that's one way you could do it. And again, I'm not talking about like all you may be thinking, well, you could use like resistance bands or chains to make it harder at certain points. I'm not talking about strength curves. I'm just specifically talking about overloading the negative here. So I guess you could do that way, but that would be kind of awkward. You could do the same thing with the deadlift. And the deadlift would even be more weird. You'd have to put the bar at a height that's like where you're standing up, maybe about like thigh height or hip height, unrack it. It's going to be supposedly heavier than your 1 rep max. Slowly lower it, and then have someone help you rack it. That would be awkward. I wouldn't really do that with those lifts. Some good exercises to overload the eccentric on, to overload the eccentric with that I think are great. They work really well. They're easy to do. Is, for example, curls are a good one. Again, you could just have someone partner assist you on the positive portion and slowly lower it on the negative. It's real simple to do. You just have to be careful with your core, because when you get to really heavy weights on bicep curls, I've had it happen to me before, and I've seen it happen to other people. Is you could tweak your low back, because again, at that point, it takes a lot of core engagement to stay upright with the heavy weight on a curl. Some other exercises that it could be good with would be bench press is a good one, like the example I gave earlier. If you have two good spotters on each side, you can have them unrack it, you slowly lower it, and then them assist you with it. Or you could work with one spotter if that one spotter is very strong. But again, I would recommend 2 spotters for bench press. Pull-ups are a good one. You could have a platform set up so that when you step on the platform, you're already chin height above the bar. And then you can have maybe, if you're not good at pull-ups, your body weight already might be like enough for a negative. It might be so heavy that you can't do one pull-up, but then a negative, doing the negative portion overloads it. But if you're someone who could do a lot of pull-ups, you might have to have a weight, like a weight belt with a plate or 2 in between your legs. And what you could do is step off the platform, slowly lower it, and then just drop down, take off the plates, step up on the platform, put on the plates, and slowly lower yourself again. So pull-ups, it works really, really well with. I guess technically you could do it with overhead press, but I wouldn't recommend it for overhead press at all. That would be kind of an awkward one to do. Dips would be awkward, and I wouldn't recommend it with dips. So far, some just, again, basic ones I just recommend would be curls, pull-ups, and bench press are good ones you could do it with. Again, you could get creative, but your goal is to, again, it has to be loads that are greater than your concentric or isometric 1 rep max. Because again, if it's not, then you're not really overloading yourself. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be your 1 rep max. You could be doing loads that are part of your greater than your 5 rep max, or something like that. For example, let's just say you can curl 95 pounds. So that would be like a 45-pound barbell on 25 pounds. What if that's your 5 rep max? You can do 5 clean reps and that is it. Then what if you were to curl it? What if you're trying to overload it? So you can overload the eccentric in this way. Do your 5 reps. That's your max. You by yourself cannot do 5 more reps. And then from maybe 6 to 10 reps, you could have your partner assist you. So technically, you could have your partner assist you on the positive portion, the concentric, and then you control the eccentric. So even though you're not working with a 1 rep max, you're going past your 5 rep max. So it's all about working more than your repetition maximum. So you could do those things in that sense. So that might change things up a little bit. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your 1 rep max. The whole point is your eccentric has to be working with some type of resistance that your concentric isometric can no longer do at that point. Because if you can curl that with your concentric or isometric, again, you're not overloading the eccentric portion of that. So that's basically to sum up the magnitude of tension portion, in that you have to do it in that way for it to actually be overloading the eccentric. So you're not just overloading the eccentric by going slower. Now, the other argument or point that people tend to say is that, well, I understand that I'm not overloading it on magnitude of tension. I'm trying to overload the eccentric by doing a higher time under tension. And I guess this might not even be them overloading the eccentric. Some people just say, and you can, when I go over this point, it covers both angles. Some people aren't even trying to bring the eccentric into the equation. They're just saying, oh, I think a higher time under tension means more gains. And this is true to an extent. There has to be, again, this comes down to impulse. What impulse is impulse is just, okay, for example, magnitude of tension, so like the amount of tension you have, equals force. And then force multiplied by time, like how much time that force that you're applying is, like the duration of that force, equals impulse. So there was actually a good study, and a lot of the stuff that I'm getting from this book, you guys, is from Eric Helms's Strength and Muscle Pyramid. So if you guys check that book out, it's a really good book. I learned a lot from it. And it's one of the best books I ever read. So if you guys like that book, check it out. But he referenced the study in here, and it was actually a good study. Basically, a study, to sum it up, says the study done was one group was working with 70% of their 1 rep max for a squat, and the second group was working with 30% of their 1 rep max with a squat. They did some sets. I don't know what the time was, but basically they equated volume for both groups. The 30% group, the group that was working with 30% of their squat 1 rep max, had a higher time under tension, a higher velocity, and higher power output, but had lower impulse. Because remember, again, force, which is magnitude of tension, force multiplied by time, because again, equals impulse. So the 30% 1 rep max group in the study had a lower impulse, and then they had less hypertrophic gains than the group that had 70% of 1 rep max. So what was the determining factor here? It was the amount of force that they were applying, which led them to have lower impulse than the group that was doing 70% of the 1 rep max on the squat. So again, it's not just time under tension. There's a threshold here that I'm not even familiar with what that exact threshold is, but in this specific instance, obviously 30% of 1 rep max is just a lot lower impulse, that it makes it so that it would be, even though you're higher on all those other variables, time under tension, velocity, and power, it doesn't make up for the fact that you're just not applying that much force to the bar to have high enough impulse to make enough gains. So a good example that Eric used in his book was, and it wasn't just Eric's book, there was a couple other people. It was, I can't recall their names off the top of my head, so my bad, I don't mean to be disrespectful to them, I just can't recall their names. I think one of them was Andrea Valdez and Andy Morgan. I think those are the 2 names. Yep, those are the 2 names. So those are 3 of them got together and made that book. But one example that Eric gave was, let's just say if force had no equation, force or impulse had no, force specifically had no part in gaining muscle. It was just, time under tension or power or velocity and stuff like that. Essentially, you could put ankle weights on, and then you could walk around all day and you would make gains nonstop. You would just continue to make gains. Your quads, your calves would be jacked just from putting ankle weights in. Again, because if we're saying that force doesn't matter, low amounts of force applied over a long period of time, super high time under tension, if you just walk around with ankle weights all the time, you'd be jacked. But again, impulse does matter. Force, in that equation of impulse does matter. So you need a certain threshold of force and a certain threshold of impulse to be able to make some gains or optimal gains. So when it comes to time under tension, what I'm trying to say is that with time under tension, you don't want to be shooting. I like saying that term because it's a good example. You're essentially shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to make your time under tension super high and you're having to lower weight in the process. Because this affects a lot of things, 1, it affects impulse, and 2, it affects training volume. So if you're having to lower training volume because your time under tension is so high, because think about it like this: if you were currently, let's just say I had you do let's just say you had a clone of yourself. You have version 1 of yourself and version 2 of yourself. If version 1 of yourself did curls with the 1 second concentric, let's just say a 2 second concentric and then an 8 second eccentric. That's high time under tension. Now, the version 2 of yourself did a 1 second concentric and a 2 second eccentric. That's a lot less time under tension. Version 2 of yourself is going to be able to use a lot heavier of a weight though in their curls, because you're not having such a high time under tension. You're not having to consistently control that weight for as long. So you can pick a heavier weight, which means that impulse is going to be higher, and then volume is also going to be higher at the end of your sets. So essentially what version 1 of yourself is doing is, yes, you're getting a higher time under tension, and velocity and power is probably going to be higher as well. And maybe not in that example because I said 2 second concentric. You're not lifting fast, so power might not be that high. But even if we did make a version where velocity and power was higher, let's just say we had someone said, okay, 8 second eccentric, but I want you to explode in the concentric. That time under tension, let's just say that's version 3. was 8-second eccentric and a fast concentric. Version 1 would be slow, 2-second concentric and then an 8-second eccentric, and that would be version 1. And then version 2 of yourself would be the one that's the shortest time under tension, fast concentric but 2-second eccentric. The version 2 of yourself is probably, I mean, it's guaranteed, it's going to have the highest impulse, and they're also going to have the highest training volume. So again, you don't want to, there's like it's kind of like a teeter-totter here, is you don't want such a high time under tension that you have to lower the weights you're using dramatically, or that your impulse is so low that you're not, again, you're kind of sacrificing gains. For what sake? Just to say, oh dog, I got high time under tension and look at my time under tension, man. What, that doesn't mean anything. It means absolute shit in the face of gains. If your ultimate goal is to make gains, you'll kind of put your, it's like sometimes people flip-flop. You have the people on one end who cut their range of motion short and their time under tension is extremely low to the point where it's detrimental. And then you have the other group that's almost too technical. There's no science saying that when you're so slow on the way down, so slow, a super long eccentric. And some of you may be even saying, well, you're using ridiculous examples, you know, and nobody does 8-second eccentrics, which one, I disagree. I've met people who do super long eccentrics, but even if we were to do like, okay, 1-2-second eccentric versus a 4-second eccentric, I know people who do 4-second eccentrics. I've seen that tempo all the time. I would still argue that a 1 to 2 second eccentric is fine, as long as Eric describes the eccentric portion of the movement as a muscle action. Your muscle is technically not contracting, so it's not an eccentric contraction. I might use that term sometimes because they're interchangeable, and again, I'm not being as such of a grammar Nazi about it, but technically it's just an eccentric muscle action. So when you're lowering it, there's still some, I guess, work being done, because work is force times displacement. Yeah, I think work's being done technically there because the weight's still moving. So it's still an action. There's still, you know, a process being involved with your muscle. You know, it's still somewhat resisting the weight, because if you were just to not resist the weight, it would just drop, and again, you can injure yourself. So I'm not saying that the eccentric doesn't matter, but as long as the eccentric is controlled and, you know, you're doing it in a controlled manner, 1 to 2 seconds down, in my opinion, that's fine, especially for hypertrophy, and I would even argue that it'd be better, because again, impulse is higher and volume's higher. This 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way down, I'm not necessarily sure that would be the best approach to do every single set, you know. Again, if you have a specific reason why you're implementing it, again, like there's many reasons why you might implement a slow eccentric. One example is technique. Some people just, you know, their technique is straight garbage, and that's happens with me. My technique's been bad before. So you go slow on the eccentric to make sure that you're absolutely fine-tuning your form. Again, that's for form optimization, though. That's not for gains optimization. So if your form's good and your technique's good and you're just strictly focused on hypertrophy, I wouldn't recommend doing such a slow eccentric, because again, you're essentially shooting yourself in the foot. So you have to think about, you know, training volume, and you have to think about impulse. Now, to kind of like touch up on training volume too is, again, when you think about hypertrophy, how do you see gains? Now, I define gains as this, and again, it's more in depth, but besides, like, okay, like we can nitpick at what I'm about to say and say, well, you also have to get sleep and you also have to eat enough protein. Assuming all that's taken care of, you're eating enough protein and you're sleeping enough, everything else is fine. How do you make gains in the gym? Now, the two things I would say is you have to take a heavy load or a moderately heavy load relatively close to failure in repetitions. That's one way. If you do that, you're going to see gains. Now, again, you can nitpick and say, well, what if you've already been doing that and you just keep doing the same sets? Okay, of course you're going to plateau. I'm talking about in the sense of someone applying training volume appropriately. That's how you, from let's just say you take someone who doesn't work out and they're going to start working out, or you take someone who's already working out and you add more sets. What do those new sets have to fulfill? And it would be that it's moderately heavy loads or heavy loads relatively close to failure. They don't have to be to failure for you to make gains. You can be kind of away from failure. You'll still see gains. Now, or the other thing is, or light loads to failure or very close to failure. If you're training with very light loads, you need to train to failure. It is been shown time and time again in the scientific literature. It's not even a debate. It's not up for debate. You can try to debate it, but again, you're going against the grain on this one pretty hard. So again, light loads you can optimize gains with light loads, but again, depending on how light the load is, you have to go to failure. What I recommend is if you start training below 60% of 1 rep max, or I think that's roughly 20 reps or higher, you should just go to failure. I'd recommend if your goal is to optimize hypertrophy. Especially if you're an advanced athlete. If you're an advanced athlete and you're using light loads, and you're using those light loads specifically for hypertrophy, not for recovery sets, not during a deload week, not because you're injured, but just you're implementing those in for hypertrophy, you need to go to failure. So, knowing that those are the two things that cause hypertrophy, and again, we can go more in detail on those, and another page that I kind of follow is Strength and Conditioning Research. They have like a bunch of social media pages, and he talks about this all the time, and is why is it those two things that makes hypertrophy? Why does it cause muscular hypertrophy? And it's because you're getting the muscles to contract slowly. You got to think about heavy, moderately heavy weights relatively close to failure. When you start getting closer to failure, what happens? Contraction speed starts to fall. So like, you don't lift as fast. If anyone gets close to failure, you know what I mean, is like, your rep speed starts to fall. And if you think of light loads to failure, those last few reps of light loads, you start to contract, your muscle starts to contract a lot slower too. The repetitions start to slow down dramatically. And this has been shown in the scientific literature as well, is that if you're doing fast repetitions, let's just say you're taking light loads or relatively lighter loads and you're lifting them fast, but you don't go to failure, it's been shown even if you're explosive with these light loads, you get suboptimal results or you get no results for gains. So again, it's those two things. It's moderately heavy and heavy loads taken relatively close to failure, and by relatively close, again, you can't train at like RPEs of like 1 to 4 and expect to make good gains or any gains, Again, there's some exceptions to this. If you take someone who's never done anything and then you train them at very low RPEs with light loads, they might make some gains, but that's just because they're beginners, right past that, when they plateau, you can't keep doing that. And again, I would even argue that those beginners wouldn't make optimal gains. So again, you have to think of those things they induce muscular hypertrophy. Now, from there, what is your goal once you have that? Once you have those things, again, this is where I'm nitpicking on my own to see what else you got to do, is if I take someone and I do that, I give them a set and I take a moderately heavy loads for them relatively close to failure, or light loads to failure. Is that it? You just do one set and you keep growing forever? No. From then on, training volume dictates the magnitude of adaptation. So your ultimate goal is to intelligently, and I say intelligently because you can't just give a newcomer 100 sets straight, but again, you have to intelligently implement like periodization or a program that kind of increases training volume over time, over their training career. So if they're training 10 to 20 years, they need to increase training volume over time. That's the main way to dictate how much gains they how much gains they get. So again, once you have that proper stimulus of moderately heavy loads relatively close to failure, or light loads to failure, you need to find ways to, again, add training volume. And then this is where someone who knows how to do proper periodization comes in. Newcomers can add weight week to week, then from then on, and then a lot of this too is in Eric Helm's Strength and Training book, ebook, the Strength Training Muscle Pyramid. You guys should definitely check that out. But he goes over some ways, like progressions that you can do with people. So again, that's how you dictate magnitude of adaptation. So if you can do those two things, intelligently progress over time and apply that proper stimulus for muscle growth, that's how you get jacked. And that's assuming you have everything else, in point to like nutrition and sleep. So how does this tie into the podcast? Is that when you think of when you're so focused on time and attention, you're hampering training volume. Again, I haven't seen a study where training volume is lower, but time and attention is higher, and then that group made more gains. I have not seen a study yet that shows that. I haven't, again, and then someone may say, again, any instance you come up, training volume is not lower in the instance of the group with the lower time under tension. It's if it's lower, then I'm arguing for you with that. So if you had group 1 and group 2, and group 1 has low time under tension, but let's just say you try to say, well, what if they just did 1 repetition? You know, the other group has higher time under tension, they're going to make more gains. But again, group 1 also has lower training volume. Group 2 is going to make more gains because they have higher training volume and that proper stimulus of that volume. Again, proper volume means nothing if it does not come with the proper stimulus. I could give you high volume of low load training stopped far from failure. You're not going to make any gains. So you need that proper stimulus first. So, but if group 1, let's just say they had higher volume, but very low time under tension, I don't care. If it's higher volume and there's a proper stimulus induced, let's just say both have proper stimuli induced. Group 1 and group 2. Group 2 is, let's just say it's, again, this is exactly, I'm giving you an example, but it's exactly the study that happened earlier. Well, actually, it was better in that study because volume was matched. So again, you figure that out, but assume, and that's even, that made it so it's completely equal for impulse to be dictated. So again, that was just, that study was specifically looking at impulse. But if we're looking at volume, again, I've yet to see, and I'd be surprised if like a group 1 with a higher training volume, but lower time under tension with a proper stimulus, which would probably, because if you want that, you probably have to work with heavy loads, versus another group 2, which is probably going to be lower load, high rep taken to failure. Yeah, that group, and then they have a lot higher time under tension, but lower volume. I don't care. I don't believe that group 1 again, and it's been shown that training volume dictates magnitude of adaptation, and you need to intelligently increase that over time to gain more muscle. That's been proven time and time again in the scientific literature. So what I'm trying to say is that if time under tension and eccentric muscle actions, when not properly overloaded, they're emphasized too much by people. Again, if you're sacrificing training volume and impulse to slow down your eccentric and overload it in that way, not overload it in magnitude of tension, but overload it with time, or just trying to have high time under tension, you're shooting yourself in the foot and you're losing gains. You're not going to make any more gains by that. So again, thanks for listening. That's the end of the podcast. If you guys have any questions, comments, please post them wherever you're watching this at. If you're watching this on SoundCloud, if you see it posted on Facebook, my website, or YouTube, you guys can leave a comment. If I see it, I will reply. I'll try to make sure I check on this. I know this was a pretty in-depth podcast, but it's something that I wanted to go over, and it was a lot to say, and I don't want to cram it in my YouTube video. My next video should be out tomorrow or the next day. Again, I hope you guys like the new gym that I've been working at. A real cool gym, amazing people in there. I'm happy to be working with Self-Made Training Facility. I plan to stay there for a very long time, if not forever. And yeah, I'm glad to be bringing you guys these gym videos, because I know that me doing those whiteboard videos were kind of boring. And it doesn't mean that I never don't want to do whiteboard videos. I might want to do whiteboard videos to teach you guys a topic. Maybe there's a topic I want to teach you, but it might not necessarily require me to be training. But again, I understand people like seeing gym equipment and they like seeing the application. So I'll try to make most of my videos that. I decided to do a podcast today because I haven't done that in a while. So last but not least, if you guys want, again, one-on-one training, small group training, online training, nutrition, meal plans, head on over to jpfitnesspro.com. That's the best way to contact me. I have my phone number and email on there, or you can leave me a message at the bottom of my website. There's multiple social media platforms that you can reach out to me on. Again, I kind of link them everywhere. So if you're seeing this podcast, you probably already have a way to message me. Again, the first 5 in-person clients get half off for the first package. So if you want to take advantage of that deal, please let me know. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.